Welcome to the Rural Leaders Podcast. My name is Dana Peterson, and I'm joined by my co-host Richard Fordyce, where we visit with leaders across the country with hopes of inspiring and equipping you to act in your rural community. Richard and I, our pathway connected while we were serving in Washington, D.C. There we shared a passion for rural communities and the farmers that live there. And so it's when this podcast opportunity came about, we really jumped at the opportunity to highlight and bring to the rest of the country the tremendous rural leaders that we know, and to share the tools and equip you to act in your rural community. So Richard, I know we're in the middle of this series on rural connectivity. And it looks like you're someplace fun. I am away from home this week as well. So connections are important while we're traveling.
Way to bring that right in. Yeah, absolutely. So I am at the Farm Progress Show in Boone, Iowa. And you're right, this is going to be the second episode of our series on rural connectivity and rural broadband and all the things that really kind of go along with that, because we know how critically important it is. And if you walk the grounds here at the Farm Progress Show, I mean, there is some amazing innovation and some amazing technology that really will change. It'll change for the better the way some farmers are doing some work, how some rural communities honestly are going to be able to do some work. But it's, in some cases, it's so dependent on being connected, right? And so that's why we wanted to bring this series forward, bringing experts to talk about those kinds of things where they've been successful, lessons that they've learned, getting to a point of success. And we've got another great guest today that's going to offer some insight on, maybe some lessons learned. Again, what was their path to getting to success? And I think it's, that's what Dana and I really like to do is to find these stories and to share these things with our listeners, so that maybe you can replicate that, and maybe you can use some of the things that they've used to get to this point. But yeah, it's it's always great to see you, Dana. Sometime we ought to do this sometime, like together in the same room. I think that'd be fun.
Oh, that would be
fun. Yeah. So where are you at?
Yeah, I'm in Wichita right now, and I'm attending the Kansas Housing Conference, and it is, coming to Wichita. It's the largest city within the state of Kansas. So it's not technically rural, but it is definitely a part of our ecosystem and our economy here in the state. And as you were talking about the innovations that are there at the Farm Progress Show, I'm reminded of the innovations that are coming out of Wichita with aerospace and the airplane companies that are here, and really that whole industry is being revitalized in this time frame. There's tremendous amount of innovations with beyond the line of sight technologies and aerospace innovations that are being adapted into agriculture and to fill needs of rural America. And so it's great to be in this environment.
I love that stuff. Like I don't understand a lot of it, but I really love it. So I know, we've got a great guest today, and I'll give you. I'm gonna give you his name. It's Mitchell Bailey, and he is the CEO of GRM Networks. And we're going to learn a little bit more about what GRM Networks are, where they are, and we're going to learn a lot from Mitchell and the path that they've had to get a lot of their members connected. And so we're going to meet Mitchell here in just a few minutes, right after you hear these messages, and we'll be right back.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move. So I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
People do some pretty cool things in their 40s and 50s. Why should saving for retirement be any different? So wherever you are in your retirement savings journey, head to aceyourretirement.org and start chatting with Avo today. That's aceyourretirement.org.
Welcome back to the Rural Leaders Podcast. As we indicated in the opening segment, we've got another guest in our series about rural connectivity and infrastructure and rural broadband. And it's a real honor for me to introduce our guest for this episode of the Rural Leaders Podcast. So Mitchell Bailey is the CEO of GRM Networks, and the reason it's so special for me is GRM is my local phone co-op, and we're gonna talk to Mitchell about a whole bunch of things. But what was GRM's what was their strategic view? What was their look forward several years ago to be able to position an independent telephone co-op to be so far along in installing fiber to the home, and really making the residents in my part of the world part of this century in connectivity. So Mitchell, welcome to the Rural Leaders Podcast. And I guess, if you want to do a bit more of an introduction, that's great, but maybe talk to us a little bit about what GRM is, and we'll just toss it in your court and let you say what you want to say.
Sure. Well, thank you both for having me today. I'm really excited to be here, and have really enjoyed seeing what you all were doing with this podcast. I think that's really important. We try to focus on the same things in our communities, which kind of gets to your point. So GRM Networks is a member-owned telecommunication cooperative that provides both phone and now internet service, among a few other, to rural residents throughout north central Missouri and south central Iowa. So, just as you mentioned years ago, actually back in 1951, through just the exchange of a couple conversations trying to solve a problem for, phone service and long distance services, a group of individuals started the phone company, and it grew and grew and grew. And then, as we've all experienced, technology changed. And I think we saw our place in that technology evolution. And so, back in the late 90s, we began offering DSL services, and then, that bled into fiber to the home services. And so we started fiber to the home construction in about 2009 and haven't stopped since. According to the most recent reporting requirements from the FCC, within our serving territory, we have about 33,000 locations that make up our rural serving area. And so, as you can imagine, infrastructure to build that is very costly, especially when, some of those locations are 3 to a mile. And so we have just really been focusing our efforts on, building out the infrastructure to be able to provide our rural residents with all of these vital telecommunication services that they need for the important things that I know you guys have been focusing on. And that's, connectivity to telehealth, precision agriculture, working from home, all of those very important things that, are necessary for rural residents to connect to, and those opportunities, the same as what it is for residents of more urban populated areas.
Yeah, welcome, Mitchell. It's great to have you on the podcast. And I'm just really thrilled because I know that GRM was one of the pioneers in navigating some of the federal funding streams. When Richard and I were in Washington, D.C., there was a tremendous understanding from our politicians about the steep requirements for funding for, like you said, territories that don't have very many hookups when you talk about this sort of technology. And so, can you kind of describe for us a little bit of that journey of funding your network for broadband communications, and then as a leader in that, what is a lesson that you've learned in that journey?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I'll start with, as a telecommunication cooperative, member owned. It's our responsibility to provide those communication services to our members, and so that's really been a driver behind our desire to bring these services to our rural customers. And so, of course, we try to do the same thing as many others, and tap into whatever resources are available to us. And a big one that we've really leveraged throughout the years has been our membership with NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association. They're an industry association and have a long history of being able to have members that provide the highest level of service to rural residents. And their latest example of that, which is something that we're really proud of, is their Smart Rural Community Initiative, which highlights rural broadband providers that lead and collaborate on broadband-enabled projects and help connect rural communities to all the opportunities that fiber provides. And so between that and the state resources that are available, I think being part of both Missouri and Iowa, we have access to the state broadband offices in both states, and both are just a wealth of information. For example, both states have compiled an interactive map detailing broadband and pinpointing locations that are considered to be unserved or underserved, that allow us to really focus on where we would like to go as we continue to expand our broadband infrastructure.
So I know, Mitchell, that there are, and so this is the way I remember GRM, and they're dipping their toe into the rural broadband area, and it was a strategic decision made by management and made by the board that this is critical. Like, we need to do this, and we need to get started now because it's going to take some time. And so I think GRM needs to be applauded for that forethought, like thinking forward and doing that sort of thing. But then I also kind of remember that you all were pretty successful in navigating even the federal, the federal opportunities for grants and those sorts of things. And I think that as those things change, whether that was FCC or USDA rural development, you all seem to really, really kind of hit the mark when it came to explaining what GRM was doing and actually being successful in gathering and gaining some of that funding.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Richard, we were really grateful that you were able to be a part of that award ceremony in 2019. As you mentioned, we were successful in a Reconnect award provided by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Reconnect program that aids us in being able to fulfill our commitment to bring fiber optic connectivity to northern Missouri and southern Iowa. And so, yeah, I think in thinking back over that project and grants that we've done even before that, or applied for since that point, I think a big aspect of that is just researching the program requirements, making sure that you're really in tune with the specific requirements, and if nothing else, the opportunities that exist out there. I think as more of these funding opportunities have become available, I think what we've seen is that a large amount of the application content is all the same. So if I were to make a recommendation, it's start building that application even before the specific funding application becomes open and available. Again, most of that the common content within the application is going to include a certain amount of company background information, organizational documentation such as a company overview or key management employee resumes and things like that. So yeah, I mean, anyone can certainly go ahead and start building that portfolio of information. And so then as those specific opportunities are open and available, you can fine tune that a little bit specific to that particular program and refine it so that you're well positioned to meet the criteria there. And then, like you said, it's really just about sharing our stories and our success. I think that's one thing that we've learned a lot more about throughout this process, that the last 5 years especially, is that we've taken it upon ourselves to really try to build this infrastructure and provide this for our communities, but we've never really stopped to tell our story and to share with our rural communities and beyond that the success of that. And I think that's really kind of what we'd focused on with these applications, is using that as an outlet to be able to share what we've already done, and then use that to kind of tell the story of where we want to go and how we plan to get there.
Mitchell, you hit it on the nail there for rural communities and rural leaders. I think we rarely tell our story. We rarely take a minute after we've had some success and celebrate. I was just sharing that with some of the businesses in my hometown recently that had some success. Take a moment, celebrate with your team, and I think that's really important. So as you think about kind of working with your customers and the communities, our previous episode in this series was a local community leader, and you are a telecommunications leader. What are the communication pathways and maybe collaborations that have worked for you in Missouri and Iowa as you work with your customers and rural community leaders?
I think that is a great point. And I've seen several of your episodes, and they all have that common thread of collaboration and
Mhm.
broadband infrastructure, broadband funding. I mean, it's really no different. Collaboration is still a very important key in all of that. And just as you mentioned, I think collaboration, whether it be providers, community leaders, all of these together, they collaboration just naturally leads to networking, which leads to learning about other funding opportunities, as well as additional communities in need of service. And
Mm.
I encourage everybody to explore these opportunities and explore these relationships, because I think that's really what these rural opportunities are all about. I look back at how things have kind of developed in the last 5 years, especially. Richard, you kind of talked about that earlier. Technology changing, funding opportunities changing, and I think now more than ever, our elected officials realize that there is a digital divide and have made this funding available in an attempt to try to rectify that. And so I think, whether a provider or a community leader, you can strengthen your project or your application by this collaboration, because this collaboration demonstrates a real need within the community for fiber broadband. And, you know, as you mentioned in your example, if you're not a rural broadband provider, but you are aware of a need, then reach out to your local rural broadband provider and see if you can form a partnership. Because, you know, again, one of the things that really strengthens these applications is letters of support and participation from local governments or local community leaders or organizations. And you know, I sometimes in these situations or these conversations think back to you know, where we started this conversation, and that was our history as a telephone cooperative, and our, you know, at least specific to us, our rural telephone cooperatives arose out of this spirit of innovation and determination and collaboration. And I think, you know, I think another thing that you've touched on is what is instilled in rural Americans, and rural residents are resourceful and resilient, and you know, so many times can work together to make the impossible possible. And I think that's really, you know, the important part of that collaborative aspect.
I think Mitchell needs to be our spokesperson for the podcast. Like, everything he just said is exactly what we aspire to be. Seriously. But you did mention something that I think is critically important, and we've seen an evolution by whether it's state lawmakers or federal lawmakers, appropriators, where maybe not long ago we had to argue the fact that there is a need for funding for rural broadband. Those days are over. I don't know that we have to argue for the need for that anymore. Most folks agree that that's exactly what needs to happen, that we need to get rural America caught up to urban and suburban America. And so I think that where some of our energies probably were spent, you know, doing some conversations, advocating for what we need in rural America, now I think, and maybe you tell me if this is wrong, Mitchell, but now I think that that the conversation and the focus is more around the strategy of how do we deploy it. Not is it necessary to get the funding, but how do we strategically deploy? And I just think. So I'm going to let you answer that question, and then I want to just say that you guys have been very strategic about how you deployed rural broadband in your coverage area.
No, I think you're exactly right. I think that is conversation has shifted more towards deployment and not whether or not, you know, it needs to be deployed, or whether or not people need broadband, or whether or not there's money out there. I mean, I think they've prioritized funding, and now it's about focusing on how to achieve that.
Well, you know, just like every segment, Dana, these things go way too fast. And
yes, they do.
And so we're about out of time, but you know, Mitchell would give you another shot. Anything else we haven't covered? Anything that, you know, a thought that you want to leave with our viewers and our listeners?
You know, I think if I were to leave anyone with a thought, it would just simply be, you know, don't be afraid to apply. You may think that there's no way your project would qualify, or you may think as a community leader, I wouldn't even know how to start. But, you know, like we discussed, I think everyone recognizes the need. I think it's just collaborating, getting the right heads together, and not being afraid to really apply.
Well, thank you. Very well said. And gosh, this time went fast. You provided so much information that I know is going to be beneficial to our listeners. And we can't thank you enough, Mitchell, for being on for this short little bit of time. And as we continue with this series, I might give you a call and see if there's anything we're forgetting, because I know you know this topic really, really well. And again, thanks for being on with us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. We love being able to tell our story and hope that it offers some encouragement to other providers or leaders to be able to do the same thing for their rural customers. So thank you again. I think it's great what you guys are doing.
Well, thanks, Mitchell. And that's going to do it for this segment, but we'll be right back after these messages.
Hey, Bobo, do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.
Do clouds take naps?
I couldn't tell you.
Dad, do stars visit their friends?
Look!
Here you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the Rural Leaders Podcast. Dana, that was a really good segment. And I knew Mitchell would be very forthcoming and kind of talking about kind of what they've done. And so, I mean, kick me under the table if this isn't the appropriate thing to say. But I mean, he had a lot of great things to say, but he did throw a bone to the Rural Leaders Podcast, and that he'd listened to several episodes, and it was about collaboration and partnership and people. That's how you get things done. And I know we can talk more about the technical aspects of what Mitchell had to tell us, but I was really happy to hear him say that.
Yeah, that was just a nice shout out to our previous guests and our previous conversations, and really some insight that we might be making an impact in rural America, which is encouraging as well. He did highlight the collaboration piece and brought it back to the history of the telecommunications co-op. That is the core of co-ops that formed in all different needs in rural America, whether it's telecommunications, electricity, agricultural supplies and distribution. There's lots of different types of co-ops, including housing co-ops. And as I'm thinking here at the Kansas Housing Conference about, what can we do in rural America for housing, a co-op might be an option to bring that collaboration and that working together to the forefront.
No, I think so. I mean, that sounds like a good idea to me. And I think, Mitchell's pretty humble, right? But they honestly, they've accomplished a lot. And I think too that he was, I think he was downplaying a little bit about the strategic foresight that they had. They said that we are going to make sure our members are connected, and they made investments of time, they made investments of research, they made investments of money to get that local telephone co-op to the place it is today. And Mitchell was a big part of that. So I hope our listeners heard the between the lines story about it is. I mean, it's like our guest an episode ago talked about. This is not a quick thing. This sometimes takes some time. It certainly takes a lot of energy, and it takes that collaboration. And I was so happy to hear Mitchell talk about that.
Yeah. And it took a lot of learning, right? And as we're
Absolutely.
going through this series on rural connectivity, it's our hope that those that have the desire to bridge the digital divide in rural America will keep learning. And we want to too. So please send us your feedback, your expertise, your connections with regards to this subject or other subjects. Or you can email us at Dana@the Rural Leaders Podcast or Richard@the Rural Leaders Podcast. It is our hope and desire that we grow leaders around the country, and that our conversations are comfortable for every stage of leader. And so I look forward, Richard, to our next discussion around rural connectivity. And until then, just hope that everyone out there stays inspired to act in your rural community.